How many of history's greatest love stories are actually stories of abuse? We read them as poetry. We quote them. We romanticize them. But behind the verses, there are girls, 12, 13, children in a world that saw them as assets, as alliances, as property. Today, we reveal how relationships with minors were normalized, justified, and even idealized, from the Roman Empire to medieval Europe to modern culture, and why the voices we remember are almost never theirs. In the Roman Empire, marriage was never a personal choice. It was a transaction, a system designed to stabilize families, secure inheritance, and consolidate power. And at the center of this system were children. The legal age for marriage was 12 for girls, but they were often betrothed as early as 7, their futures signed away before they could even read. Consent, in the modern sense, simply did not exist. What existed instead was utility. The Code of Justinian declared, girls who have reached the age of 12 are considered ready. But readiness here was not emotional, not psychological. It was biological. The moment a body could bear children, society forced the child into adulthood. A transition not based on maturity, but on function. To Rome, this was order. To the child, it was erasure. A girl was no longer allowed to just grow up. She was just expected to be useful. As the Roman Empire collapsed, and Europe reshaped itself under religious authority, the justification for control changed. But the structure beneath it did not disappear. It evolved. Medieval Europe introduced a word that appears to signal progress: consent. But in reality, we see how consent meant nothing. The choice had already been made. Families decided. Guardians enforced. Society decided a girl's fate long before she was ever asked. One of the most frequently cited love stories of this era reveals this tension clearly. Heloise was a teenager, likely around 15. Pierre, a Bayard, was 37. Her teacher, a respected philosopher and theologian. He was entrusted with her education and given absolute control over her mind. A Bayard later reflected on this dynamic with striking clarity, comparing it to a lamb placed before a wolf. Whether intended as confession or metaphor, the imbalance is unmistakable. This was never a romance between two equals. It was a trap where power was twisted into intimacy, and fear was mistaken for affection. But if Heloise's trap was emotional, other stories were brutally physical. Margaret Beaufort was married at 12 years old. At 13, she gave birth to Henry Tudor, the future King Henry VII. The childbirth was catastrophic. Her body, still just a child's body, was forced into a process it could not safely endure. She survived, but with permanent consequences. She would never have another child. Yet Margaret's story did not remain only one of suffering. In later life, she used her power to protect other young girls in her family from the same fate. Her experience became knowledge, and that knowledge became resistance. Within a system that normalized early marriage, she became one of the very few who dared to speak out against it. But as centuries passed, something else began to change how people saw these relationships. It wasn't about the law anymore, and the reality was the same, just better hidden. Behind symbols, behind poetry, behind romantic ideals. In 13th century Florence, Dante first encountered Beatrice when they were both 9 years old. In his mind, she never grew past the shadow of that child. In his writing, Beatrice became a number, the number 9, a symbol of divine perfection rather than a human being. He wrote about her as an adult, even from the perspective of his 40s. But he always filtered her through that memory of a 9-year-old girl. Beatrice, the person, had a real life. She was forced into an arranged marriage at 21 and died at 24, likely from childbirth. But literature preserved only the version shaped through his eyes. Dante did not create exploitation, but by turning a child into an object of worship, his work established a powerful literary archetype. The young girl transformed into an ideal through the eyes of an adult man. Centuries later, writers like Vladimir Nabokov would revisit that tradition in darker and far more disturbing ways. In Lolita, the young girl is once again filtered entirely through male obsession, not as a fully independent voice, but as a symbol shaped by desire, projection, and narration. Culture did not inherit Beatrice herself. It inherited the idea of the muse. This dark obsession crossed oceans and generations. In 19th century America, Edgar Allan Poe married his cousin Virginia Clemm. She was 13. He was 27. He later wrote, "We loved with a love that was more than love," a phrase that would become one of literature's most quoted expressions of devotion. But Virginia's lived experience remains largely absent from the historical record. She lived within illness, dependency, and isolation, dying at 24. We inherit Poe's language of grief. We do not inherit Virginia's voice. In Victorian England, Lewis Carroll's relationship with Alice Liddell was treated the same way, softened under the words of innocence and imagination. But innocence can be a trap. When idealized, it freezes a person in time. It stops them from growing beyond the role given to them. Alice was a child at the center of a story that outlived her own life. And history kept the narrative written around her, not the experience she actually lived. Across all these stories, one pattern stays the same. The voice belongs to the adult, the writer, the one with authority over memory. The subjects of these stories, the girls themselves, never get to tell their own lives. And when only one side survives, the truth is lost. By the early 20th century, the world began to change. In 1924, Charlie Chaplin married Lita Gray. He was 35. She was 15. Unlike in earlier centuries, people no longer saw this as a romance. They saw it as a scandal. Years later, in 1957, rock and roll star Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin. The public reaction was immediate and angry. His career collapsed almost overnight. What had been normal for centuries was now publicly rejected, not because human behavior changed overnight, but because how we judge it did. For centuries, many of these relationships were completely legal, but legality does not define morality, and never has. As the world changed, laws began to shift, slowly, unevenly. Society finally began to see the harm. What had been called tradition was now seen as control. What had been called romance was now recognized as power. History keeps very few records from the girls themselves. Virginia Clemm left no diaries, no letters. Nothing survives. Lita Gray spoke later in life, describing a reality that was completely different from the public romance. Across centuries, the pattern stays the same. Those with the power to speak define the story. Those without it are forgotten. And when only one side gets to tell the truth, silence becomes history. These patterns did not disappear. They just moved into our movies, our books, and our media. We still take unequal relationships, and we still call them romance. History does not look exactly the same, but it speaks in a new language. Child marriage is not a sacred union, but a violation of the right to be human. Real progress is not just a trend. It exists in our laws, our awareness, and how we protect the vulnerable. It means allowing childhood to remain childhood before an adult decides to rewrite it. Because the most important voices in history are not always the ones who wrote the books. Sometimes They are the ones who were never allowed to speak. If we want to understand history, we must be willing to question the stories we were taught to admire.